Hello and welcome to Workstream's weekly webinar. Today we are joined with author Pete Havel, the author of The Arsonist in the Office, Fireproofing Your Life Against Toxic Coworkers, Bosses, Employees, and Cultures. And specifically what we're going to focus on is how small business owners, operators, and HR leaders can really build great work cultures and also screen for people who are arsonists, people who could be destroying their culture. So to kick it off, I wanted to, I really just want to say I love the book, really helpful with a lot of just great tips in general. One of the things that I pulled from the book, Pete, was you mentioned a sign of a toxic workplace is that the problem solvers leave or are fired when they voice concerns. So I guess to start off with is, who is going to be using this book? How can people, deal with the toxic work culture when the first thing that happens is the problem solvers leave?
Hey, this is great. We're starting off with a softball and a promotional for myself. The book is really, because I found myself when I wrote it, I was somebody at a fairly high level in the company that I thought I had some power. I had some influence within the organization, but I found myself with a problem that no level of the culture was going to protect me from, and that was being hired to work with the employee that was so toxic. None of the leadership within the organization wanted to make the move to remove them. So it's really for that person at the bottom rung of the ladder, middle management or leadership, they're all going to get something out of it. So your question is, what happens and what do you do if everybody's leaving? Frankly, if the conditions are so bad, everybody's jumping ship, one of two things are probably going to happen. Hopefully the arsonist is going to leave. And I describe arsonists as the people with just enough power and definitely the mindset to burn stuff down. It may be your culture, it may be your career, it may be the company you're working with. And we see these people in all sorts of different parts of the corporate world. But one of the things I learned was that self-preservation is always going to be a key to whatever you do. You've got to watch out for yourself. As much as we like to say, oh, we need to watch out for everybody, love everybody in the organization. One of the things I learned, and I hear it constantly, is people are watching out for themselves first and foremost. They'd like to protect you if they can. But if you're in trouble, you need to start looking outward to see what your next move may be. Or if you own the company, know that if you let the problems continue, you're going to be facing the problems.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that's important is just identifying arsonists really early on. And you spoke a lot, you wrote a lot in the book about the hiring processes and how can you screen for them. Do you have any tips for hiring managers as to what to look out for to prevent bringing somebody toxic in?
Absolutely. That person that when you're asking them questions, for instance, I know a good one when you're looking for someone to be a part of your team is something along the lines of, tell us about a problem that you solved at work and tell us how you did it. And if you're having somebody that was obviously part of a team that tackled the problem and is talking about nothing but themselves, the I type of situation, you've got a problem. You may have a problem there. Or that person that when you're asking about, and here's one for hiring managers, what did you think of your last manager? Tell me about your managers. And you're getting somebody that is already going negative on the people that they've dealt with in the past. Those are a couple. The other thing, and it's amazing how much I hear of this from people in HR, is frankly what a joke the references process has become in some organizations, where you have companies that are basically just trying to check the box to be able to say, we contacted 3 people and that we've jumped through that hoop and you're done with. And that's great if you've got a great employee, but if you have somebody that has been hell on wheels in past jobs, you're missing a golden opportunity to learn more about them. If I'm a hiring manager, especially in a small organization where a virus, a fire can spread quickly, you want to know who you're hiring, and you want to take the time to let them, and we may talk about this during the COVID-19 era, how you find out a little bit more of who they are beyond the resume or that quick call to what may be a former manager, but maybe somebody's cousin for all we know. So
Yeah.
people take an extra step.
Yeah, I mean, we've chatted with hiring managers and operators who, when they really need to fill a position, they joke it's like the glass or mirror test, which is if they breathe on it and it fogs up, they're hired. So I think we definitely, need to do more steps. One of the questions I love that you suggested is, what was your least favorite thing about your previous employer? I've never asked that question before, but I'm certainly going to now. Are there any other questions like that you just think everyone should add to their interview?
This one's not a question, but what it is it gives you a little bit of insight into who they are. And I think there's various ways that you can use this example. Walt Bettinger, who now heads up Charles Schwab Investments, provides a great example of what he used to do with senior managers. Now, cat's out of the bag because he told the story to the New York Times, and everyone knows this story if they want to check up on him. But what he used to do is invite senior level executives to breakfast with him at some restaurant somewhere, and say he would get there a few minutes early and tell the waiter or waitress, could you mess up this person's omelet? Throw some things in there that don't belong. Do something. I'm going to tip you a little bit extra. Do something that, frankly, is going to cause some people to be irritated. And he wanted to see how they reacted. Were they going to roll with the punches and just say, be polite, say this is what I ordered, walk through it professionally, or are they going to be a real jerk to the waiter or waitress? That starts painting a little bit of a picture, and apparently it was successful in a few cases of him finding people that frankly he didn't want in his company. I think you can probably do the same type of thing to find out who you're dealing with. You can probably do that in the hiring process with, for instance, administrative people. Just thinking creatively, have them deal with a variety of people and see how they're going to react in real world situations. I think that may be one of the best ways to do it, in that it's not just on paper. You're getting a real life feel for what this person's made of. And the other thing about that, combining real world situations with your team, but also have a quick trigger if you are finding problems, and that you're not going to have things linger on too long if there is something that may be serious down the line for your company, and allow that person who may be a lot of trouble to get a little bit too comfortable in there, and you to be relying on them too much. Yeah,
that's a great point. I know in my own interview process, when I'm hiring people, one of the things I always try to do is have a bad idea or a bad suggestion that I say, I really want to implement this, and what is your opinion on it? Like, how long would it take? How, would you be able to do this? So for example, if I'm hiring somebody for ads and performance marketing, I'll say, I really want to do more with LinkedIn ads and move away from, the other Facebook and social media, knowing that LinkedIn ads is like significantly more expensive and isn't quite, able to hone, and just see whether or not they react in sort of like a dogmatic personality way of like, this is awful, or if they're too much of a yes, 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 and really kind of looking for like, are they going to be able to sort of educate me and teach me about their opinion without getting flustered?
Absolutely. Yeah, because at some point you're going to be sitting across from them in a meeting, and find a lot about them that way.
It's really interesting to see just like how people react when another thing with designers, for instance, like I'll show them a mock-up of something that I know is really ugly, that is something that like we had somebody else do, and was like a first draft and is just painfully bad. And then I'll say like, I really want to implement this style throughout the website. Would you be able to copy this style and do it? And you can just see really quickly whether or not there's somebody who like will educate you on like guiding you to the right direction, or who just like shuts down when, you know, asked to do something. So yeah, and then it's always like you have to clear the air after and be like, by the way, I know that that was a bad idea. I just know that I'm not going to have the right ideas all of the time, and I want to make sure you can tell me when they're wrong. So it's I don't know, that's something I regularly do. One of the other thing you said is in the hiring process, you want to check for people who are obsessed with rules. How do you check for that?
I think there's probably, I think we've all met somebody that's trying a bit too hard. And you're right, that is having 100% accuracy on any one of these things. You're only going to bat so well in any one of these situations. But that person that lives a world in nothing but black and white, I don't know how they would function in most corporate environments. In that project you just described, okay, the one you described sounded awful, but if you have you know a problem at work, there's going to be a lot of different answers that are pretty close to right. There may be some ethical issues that are always going to be black and white, or legal that are always going to be black and white. But somebody that seems to be, I guess I would frame it, trying a bit too hard to fit in the box. And I know there's some of the personality tests that you can take in various companies that try and weed some of these out. The people that seem to be saying to you that they are sinless in their thought processes at all times, I frankly don't know whether to have a good feeling about those types of hires, because most people I work with and have worked with find a little bit more nuance in the world, and I personally would have difficulty having a good sense of that person that just seemed to be forcing it.
Do you factor in the Myers-Briggs type personality tests? Do you think about sort of like, are there certain ones to watch out for?
That is not an area that I'm an expert in, and I think a lot of those people, a lot of those taking the test, especially if they get it in the hiring process, are going to try and think of what the best answer would be to be hired. But yeah, I'm not opposed to them, but I do find myself wondering at times whether you're getting a full picture or you're getting the answer that people want you to have.
Yeah. Well, changing gears a bit, Pete, I was wondering if you could just elaborate on the disruptive behavior pyramid intervention that you went into in the book. I found it to just be so incredibly helpful that I'd love for you to take me through it.
Absolutely. And it's so easy and just makes a lot of sense. And it's a glorified 3 strikes and you're out type of approach when dealing with an employee. And I should give credit. It was created out of Vanderbilt University by a professor by the name of Jerry Hickson. And Dr. Hickson basically has this 3 strikes and you're out, like I said, type of approach that begins with, if you have an employee that is being disrupted, that's causing a problem, that you're catching them in a mistake that doesn't quite reach the level of you're immediately fired. The first step is kind of a conversational intervention of, hey, we've identified this problem, we're concerned about it. Lydia, we want to make sure this doesn't happen again, okay? That's kind of the feel of that first one. So that's step 1. Step 2, when the problem arises again, you're going to want to have some documentation of it. Kind of I've heard this called the come to Jesus moment, or the moment of truth type of thing, where you say, Lydia, this is what we found. We've talked to so-and-so, and again, we want to make sure that this is not going to be something that you think is acceptable. kind of leave it there. If it happens a third time, and this is where it takes a real escalation, this is where something is put into writing. I guess what we often call the PIP, the performance improvement plan, that can begin that step out the door for an employee, going to them and essentially saying, this is your last chance. You need to follow what we're saying. You're going to be signing off on this, agreeing that that there's concern here, that you understand that the company is not going to be accepting this behavior anymore. And then if things don't change after that, the final step is termination, or moving them on to whatever the company is most comfortable with. But it walks through a set of steps that I think tracks with where most of us are, from both wanting a culture that can stand up to bad behavior, but also goes along with the fact that a lot of us like giving second chances, want second chances, and that frankly, from a legal standpoint, we're going to want something documented before we pull the trigger on letting somebody go. And it gives that. And I know one of the things I've heard from my friends that do hiring and firing regularly is there's a sense of guilt that no matter how bad that employee is, that you've put them in a tough position personally and professionally by terminating them or dropping them to a lower position in the company. But through that 4-step process, you've given people every chance in the book to be able to do the right thing. And if they don't, it's their fault.
Yeah, I love the documentation part. One thing you mentioned in the book is that if you're worried about yourself and protecting yourself, that you need to be, a really great note taker and document everything. It's one thing to take notes, but what do you actually do with them in a way that protects you? Or are you sharing them, especially in a sort of small business environment where you find somebody is perhaps setting you up for failure or being very toxic, and you take notes about this is exactly what they're asking me to do? What could you be doing with these notes?
And the way you just described that is exactly the dilemma that's out there. And in some cases, the answer may be nothing, in that you find yourself in a situation that is impossible to win, and you safely get yourself out of a bad situation after finding another job. But sometimes the life is more complicated, or you may be in a position. For instance, I talked with somebody the other day that was just years away from their pension being fully vested. They did not want to leave their job, and while they didn't want to fight, they felt like they needed to defend themselves so that they wouldn't be losing something of great value to them. But they were coming under attack from a colleague who was doing all sorts of bad things. And what they walked through, and I'm going to find out whether they went through with it, was they were prepared to walk up to a certain line of going to the, in their case, the general counsel of the company, and saying, here's what I've documented. And this, I've time-stamped it. I have people that have witnessed some of these things. And frankly, they were going to use it as some leverage for either their exit package or to hopefully stay on the job. One of the two, because sometimes you've got to play, and it's not playing dirty, but you need to use the tools that you have, especially if what's being done to you violates all sorts of company policies, and bad behavior is being ignored to the extent that your own job is at risk. So there's a certain amount of power that can come with it, but I never encourage that unless it's the last step. But sometimes if you need to protect yourself, you're going to want those things in writing. The one other thing that I would say on that is, at times, managers and leaders of companies are so oblivious to what's going on in the office politics world. I'm not saying oblivious across the board, because obviously if they're at the top of the company, they have some strong skills, but they may not care at all about what's going on a few steps below them. And you just may wake some of these people up to the point that they realize they've got a problem. Again, all of those types of things do come with some risk, but you never want to be in the position of having your hand forced, wondering if you're going to be forced out of a job and thinking, gee, you know, it really would have been good to write all that stuff down if only I had done that, when it's pretty easy. And these days with email, send an email to yourself if you're facing problems that you just may need to document at some point.
Yeah, I love the sending an email to yourself, because then it's time stamped and you can always, you know, forward it later if you need to sort of say, here are the notes of what I was assigned, and you know, I emailed it to myself to make sure that I did this, or just to keep track of what, you know, what they were asking of me, and you'll have a, you know, at least a dated thing that you can reference.
That's right. Well, and let me, because I know we have a lot of small business owners on here online today. They get very busy, and they run into employees that are problems, or they may have a manager that's not supposed to be doing what they're doing. And you start rationalizing as a leader all sorts of different things of why you don't need to write something down. And maybe it just, at the time, seems like a whole lot of headaches. You're going to tell the person such and such about what they need to do. But if you're not putting it in writing, you may never need that email again, but you want to put something in writing in case you need to take action in the future. If not, you're starting the process at what could be the end of a bad relationship inside an organization, rather than what could have been the step. So if you've got problems, make a note of them, and hopefully you don't need them. But yeah, there's nothing bad that can come with documenting bad behavior.
Yeah, and one thing that you also suggested that I loved is, when it comes to hiring HR leaders, you want to make sure they have a strong ethical compass. How do you, when you're hiring for an HR leader, you know, understand, do they have a strong ethical compass?
Well, I think that comes into in interviewing. I think it's finding out if you're the CEO, you want somebody that isn't just going to be a yes person. They're going to be somebody that wants to do things in an ethical manner. Somebody that is, and this is something I hear from my friends in HR constantly, they need to be someone that can be at that level around the table in the boardroom, that can have a tough conversation and stand up if something's wrong. Where this can be a challenge is, well, I guess the unethical CEO, for instance, isn't going to be looking out for that HR person that is looking to trip them up. But somebody, when you're asking them in that initial process, we have values, we stand behind those values, and we want to treat our people well. And you say, I expect you to follow our guidelines, and if there are problems, I want to know about them. You're either going to get that ethical person that understands your values and signs off on them, or you're going to get somebody who goes behind your back and violates everything that you just told them to do from day one. You're going to find out pretty quickly. You're not always going to be effective in screening out every bad leader, but I think if somebody is told very quickly, we want you to do your job, and here's our standards, and we don't accept harassment. We're not going to be an organization that is okay with retaliation. We're not going to amp up our legal liability by hiding things all over the organization. I think most people are going to get that message. Mm-hmm. And if not, you can move them on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. You know, you can, and especially earlier the better is what you get to in the book. We're going to just bring in some of the questions we received from attendants and people, you know, as they were RSVP and you could submit questions. One of the first questions we got is, I'm new to the role of hiring manager. What advice do you have for me for conducting my first interviews? And are there any books or blog posts that you would suggest reading?
Oh,
I would start by saying, read this.
I like that answer. Um, what what I think they can do and should encourage within their culture, um, and really make it a group effort, is bring as many people as possible into the process. And that means bring in your hiring managers, encourage, and you'll find this in great cultures, encourage employees that when there's a vacancy, ask them to recruit their friends, which is always a bit of a tell as to whether you've got a good company and people want their friends to join. Those are a couple of things I think are very important, um, to broaden the tent. The other thing that I would say that I hear constantly and is proven out almost 100% of the time, and I compare a lot of things. I only have so many experiences in life, so I think back to the dating process, and that is when usually if you had a terrible first date and things were going badly, rarely did they get a whole lot better along the line. I think the hiring process can also show a lot of either good things or bad things, and you want that process to be consistent with the way you want to have your company go. You're not rushing through the process just to get a warm, what do you say, a pulse. You want to find somebody with a pulse and hire them. Take the time to get to know that person. Feel like you're hiring someone for the long run rather than just to get the paperwork done. So I think anything that drives that positive relationship on both sides, you're not rushing, but you're not having things too slow. You're getting, you're having good communication in there. I've sat through some interviews where people are are sending body language telling me to essentially get out. And I've gotten apologies from people a few months after for, you're so lucky you didn't get that job. That's probably the most blatant signal of all that you've got a problem. But the other thing with that is don't, and I talk about this a lot in the book, having somebody frankly tricked into a job that no one else in the organization wants. It's a terrible thing to do to that new person, but it's also a major flashing red light to what should be to the rest of the organization of, why do none of us want this role? Why do we want to stick some poor person into the task of doing something that no one around the table would ever be willing to take on? So an HR leader that wants things cleaned up before they invite somebody else into the house.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is to determine whether or not there is just a role that nobody wants, and and what do we need to clean up ahead of time. Another great question that came in from an attendee is, how do you differentiate between someone who is toxic and somebody whose last role or company was toxic?
And I guess that, let me think through that just for a moment. That's a good question.
They're bad mouthing their last company. It's a negative thing, but how do you deal with, oh, they were the issue, or the other issue was that company?
Yeah, and that is it can be a minefield, unfortunately, that a lot of people face in the interview process, in that there are some companies with terrible cultures, people going through tough things, and the answer that they may give in an interview as to why did you leave your last employer, it may be very complicated. It may be very understandable, but it's likely going to send up a lot of red flags if you talk about your last employer. I think that's where honest discussions and careful discussions by the person being interviewed are smart. But from the company standpoint of what you're screening out, I think that's where you want to ask some good follow-up questions. Get to know this person. Ask them that question about their boss or their previous situations, and get what you can out of them. I mean, everything is going to be a bit of a judgment call, but I think there's some opportunities. For instance, someone leaves a bad situation with just a tyrant of a previous supervisor. You could call the person the tyrant, or you could talk about you faced challenges in being able to get things done. You want to work in a respectful environment, and you're excited about what you've heard about how great this company that you're interviewing with is to work for, and you've always had lots of friends in other companies. You look forward to building great relationships here. That last part is a whole lot better than my boss was a jerk. And I think there's by having those open discussions and asking people more than yes or no questions, it's always going to be a judgment call, but the more information that you get out of them, the better that judgment is going to be. And if they end up being the problem several months down the line and you realize you've made a mistake, don't be afraid to pull the trigger, because it's probably going to be best for all sides.
Yeah, that's a great lead into this next question. An attendee submitted, which is, how do you remove a toxic personality if they are related to the owner but report to you? I feel like it's a very personal, somebody's in that situation right now.
I'm not saying it's my brother-in-law from such and such a company. No, that is frankly one of those things, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is at times the saying of "it is what it is" plays in a big way. If you are, if you've been assigned to manage the boss's flunky kid who's a jerk, but the little jerk is going to have a job for the rest of his life, you're kind of stuck. And that may be one of those great opportunities where, number one, find out as much as you can about the culture around you. Find out from others in what I'd call it as safe a way as possible how the family has been dealt with. Because, for instance, if you're dealing with family members, odds are there's probably more than one of those family members in that business. And find out essentially the lay of the land. Know what you're walking into. That if you think you're going to need to go to the CEO at some point, much like that old saying of a good lawyer never asks a question in a courtroom that they don't know the answer to. Know what that CEO's answer is going to be when you broach the subject. And the answer may be, I'm in a terrible situation. I'm not going to win this one. And I can either suck it up and move on, or I can risk my job. And odds are, when it comes to family, no matter how awful that family member may be, you as an outsider are not going to win that battle. You might, but odds are you won't, and you need to think through that process. And that's really one of the big reasons I wrote The Arsonist in the Office, is that I found myself in the middle of what seemed like a battlefield, and nobody had handed me a flak jacket. I didn't have a helmet. I didn't have anything else that I needed. And I was moving 100 miles an hour to try and protect myself, but really had no idea what I should be thinking through, how I might want to think about reacting, and something that gave me some sort of a field manual for dealing with it. And that type of thinking process of, first and foremost, am I starting a war that I'm not going to be able to win, is really a good place for all managers to be if they're in that person's position.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just had a question that I wanted to ask you also from the book, which is, 9 out of 10 employees said they would trade money. They would take less money for a meaningful job. How can employers, think about building meaning into the roles, especially if they're hiring, at QSR, franchise restaurants, these are hourly jobs. How can they, build more meaning into the roles to really develop a great culture?
Yeah, and I think, and there's so many examples of this, whether it's, and I talk through sports analogies quite a bit, that some of the most successful coaches are ones that are able to find players who have roles and understand them and know they're part of something bigger. Now, not every, in a restaurant, for instance, not every short order cook is going to be motivated for the entire length of their career to do that. But to do that one role, and you're going to have transitions, but you want people at all times to understand, first and foremost, what the mission is and that you're appreciated. And especially these days where there's, for instance, those restaurants, and there's so much in the news about the PPP loans being that bridge for a few months, and then hopefully business gets moving again. That understanding among employees, especially right now, knowing that folks, and they ought to be doing this as often as possible in team meetings, that what they're doing today may affect their future for years. And so that is really, there has been no better time than right now to be having those discussions, that everybody understands what's going on in the company. I mean, not down to the dollars and cents, but knowing we need to execute in the next few months, in the next year, to keep things going. Because right now, especially, everybody understands there's a lot at stake, and you want people to feel loved and respected, but beyond that, informed about what's going on. Because frankly, in a few different ways, number one, you get a better employee. They understand their role, but they probably understand your role better as a leader within the company. Two, you humanize yourself as a leader to let them know what you're going through, to not only still be the boss, but people understand you're feeling the weight, that they may be feeling the weight of the world on their shoulders right now, and that your life is important to them. There's some good energy that can come from those honest discussions right now, as much as they can. But that respect and that feeling of belonging and purpose are huge right now.
Yeah, just transparency and empathy is what it all comes down to. I think, to build meaning. But yeah, this was really great. I want to be respectful of your time. I guess unless there are any final questions, I just wanted to promote again, your book is really great, and the people who submitted questions ahead of time, we will be ordering you and mailing you a copy of the book, The Arsonist in the Office, a really great guide on just how to fireproof your workplace from bad, toxic people, and how to promote a really great culture. Pete, thank you so much for coming on. This was really great.
Thanks for having me. This was fun. Take care.
Thank you, guys.